What if I told you America is already living through a hyperinflation? Only it's silent. There are no wheelbarrows of cash, no collapsing bills. Just a creeping erosion of your money's value, engineered by the very institutions sworn to protect it. You feel it every day. Prices surge, but your wages just crawl along. Debt chains households to a system that feels rigged. Yet, the Federal Reserve insists inflation is under control. But what if that control is the illusion itself? Because while we all argue about interest rates, the real printing press isn't in Washington. It's humming offshore an invisible network of foreign banks, secret liquidity swaps, and shadow dollars, all inflating the world in America's name. For decades, the Fed exported its inflation, sending it overseas. Now, that tide is coming home. And when it does, the middle class will learn the cruelest truth. The stability we were promised was just a cover story. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll see how the same mechanism that once made America rich is now quietly draining its lifeblood. Quick check-in. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. And if you're here for the unfiltered financial truth, hit that subscribe button, because what follows is the story they never meant for you to know. To expose today's hidden inflation, we have to go back in time. But not to 1913, when the Fed was created. We have to go back to 1694 London. At the time, England was broke after endless wars. So, a group of private financiers came to the crown with a proposal, a kind of salvation. They would lend the government all the money it needed at interest. In exchange for one simple thing, the exclusive right to issue paper credit backed by the government's debt. That was the birth of the Bank of England, and it was the first time in modern history that money itself became a form of debt. It was a powerful idea and a dangerous precedent. The rich lent money to the state, and the state then taxed the people to pay back the rich. And this is the key. Whoever created the debt, first the big banks, the well-connected insiders, got their hands on the new dollars before prices had a chance to rise. This is known as the Cantillon effect. It's the hidden reason why the elite always seem to be buying up assets for cheap, while the rest of us are left chasing higher prices for everything else. Every economic expansion, every round of stimulus rewards those with proximity to the money printer. The 1929 crash, Nixon closing the gold window in 1971, the 2008 meltdown, Don the 2020 stimulus checks. Each and every time, they called it a rescue. And each and every time, wealth was systematically moved upward from the many to the few. But here's the part that most history books conveniently skip. The inflation created by the Fed didn't just stay inside America. It seeped abroad through something called the eurodollar system. These are US dollars that are created and held outside of US borders, completely beyond the Fed's oversight and control. It started in the 1950s when London banks discovered a massive loophole. They realized they could issue dollar-denominated loans from their foreign branches with no US reporting requirements. The gold standard was dead. The credit standard was born. The public narrative we were all told was this: the Fed injected liquidity to rescue US banks. Simple enough? Trillions of dollars appeared out of thin air, routed through the most secretive financial institutions on Earth to bail out the entire global system. That is how the global shadow dollar system survived, by exporting America's inflation one last time. And the most stunning part? Those emergency swap lines never truly disappeared. They became a permanent part of the global dollar's plumbing. The result is a world of distorted prices, inflated assets, and ordinary Americans unknowingly financing the bailout of the entire world over and over again. So who orchestrated this? Where did all that money really go? The receipt is far wilder than you could possibly think, 'cause hidden deep inside the Fed's own balance sheet. Appendix is the name of the real institution running this shadow financial empire. You won't believe it when you hear it. Have you ever heard of the Bank for International Settlements? The BIS? It's a quiet, unassuming building in Basel, Switzerland. Its official job is to be a bank for central banks, but unofficially, it's the nerve center of a massive, hidden financial empire, what some call the shadow dollar system. This is where the story of silent hyperinflation begins, a story that affects every dollar you earn, save, and spend. So how does it work? When foreign central banks in Europe, Japan, or Korea need US dollars, they don't always go to the open market. Instead, they often swap their own currencies for dollars with the Federal Reserve. And the BIS acts as the middleman, the clearinghouse for these deals. Think of it as a private backchannel for the world's most powerful financial institutions. The scale of these operations is staggering. Back in the 2008 financial crisis, these currency swaps peaked at around $580 billion. That sounds like a lot, right? Well, fast forward to 2020, and the total exposure through these swaps had ballooned to over $10 trillion. And a huge portion of those dollars were created offshore, outside the direct view of the American public. This is what we mean by America's silent hyperinflation. It's an invisible expansion of the money supply happening far from our shores that quietly erodes the value of the dollars in your wallet. Every time one of these offshore dollars is created, it competes with the real dollars you work for. Every time the Fed engages in a swap, it dilutes your purchasing power. It's a slow, steady drain on your wealth. And don't just take my word for it. The BIS itself admits to this, though you have to dig deep into their reports to find it, okay? They use dry technical terms like global USD funding gaps. What does that mean in plain English, okay? It refers to unrecorded dollar liabilities, debts, and obligations that don't show up on any official balance sheet. How much are we talking about? Their reports have hinted at a figure as high as $80 trillion. $80 trillion of phantom money sloshing around the global financial system. This isn't just an academic exercise. It has real-world consequences. When these massive offshore dollar debts start to unravel, creating a crisis, what does the Federal Reserve do? Floods the system with even more dollars, feeding the very cycle that caused the problem in the first place. Inflate the money supply, export the inflation overseas through these swaps and offshore markets. Wait for the next crisis, and then inflate again to bail everyone out. It's a perpetual motion machine of monetary expansion. The result of this century-long process is a massive transfer of wealth. Let's look at the numbers. In the 1970s, the top 1% of Americans owned about 23% of the nation's wealth. Median real wages, that's your income after accounting for inflation, have been basically flat for 50 years. Is this just a coincidence? Or is it the inevitable result of a system designed not to stabilize prices, but to stabilize control? Because when you get right down to it, that's what this is all about: control. Whoever owns the credit spigot owns the world. This is where the silent hyperinflation becomes deeply personal. With the CBDC, the final stage of hyperinflation isn't about rising prices anymore. It's about rising dependency. Imagine a world with programmable money, a world where your digital wallet could be adjusted based on your carbon footprint or your compliance with certain social directives. When saving becomes impossible because your money is constantly being devalued and your spending is monitored and controlled. Inflation is no longer just a measure of economic value. It becomes a tool for measuring and enforcing obedience. The central banks are trapped. The Fed can't stop. If they stop printing money, the $80 trillion offshore dollar pyramid implodes. That would trigger a deflationary death spiral more devastating than the Great Depression. But if they keep printing, domestic prices for food, energy, and housing will continue to explode, destroying the middle class. Either path leads to the end of the illusion of stability that they worked so hard to maintain. History is littered with examples of this exact pattern. In 1720s France, you had John Law's infamous paper money bubble, which ended in ruin. In 1790s Britain, the pound was massively devalued to finance wars. In 1923 Germany, the Weimar Republic's hyperinflation saw people using wheelbarrows of cash to buy a loaf of bread. You might think that can't happen here, but look at the evidence. In 2008, the system was saved only by the creation of $16 trillion in secret emergency loans and facilities by the Fed. 16 trillion. And between 2020 and 2023 alone, the Fed created 40% of all US dollars that have ever existed. If that isn't a form of hyperinflation, what is? They just gave it a friendly, technical-sounding name: quantitative easing. Inflation will no longer just shrink your savings. QE will be used to direct your behavior. That's the dark genius of this silent system. It doesn't need a sudden, dramatic collapse. It just slowly, methodically absorbs you into its web of dependency and control. So, where does it all end? Every great empire in history has inflated its currency before it fell. Rome debased its silver coins. Britain leveraged its colonies and its currency. America has leveraged the entire world with its offshore dollars. But the world is starting to change. Nations like the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are actively building parallel financial systems. They are beginning to refuse to absorb America's exported inflation. When global demand for the dollar finally fades, the trillions of dollars that were sent abroad will have nowhere else to go. They will come rushing back home. That's when you'll see it in plain sight: food prices doubling in a year, mortgage rates spiking into double digits, and the phrase price stability disappearing from the vocabulary of economists and politicians. The people at the top knew this was coming. They engineered it. They thought they could manage and steer it forever. But ultimate control is an illusion built on borrowed time, and the clock is ticking. The greatest danger we face isn't the collapse itself, but the widespread denial that it could even happen. The comforting belief that this time is different. So, I'll leave you with a question. Looking at all this, are we really wiser now than the societies that came before us? Or are we just walking the exact same path, only dressed in better suits and using more sophisticated technology? If you believe it's time to stop living on borrowed time, share this video with someone who needs to see it. And subscribe to our channel, because we're not done. Next week, we're going to name the names, the people and institutions who are positioned to profit from this crisis. Stay sharp, stay skeptical, and always remember, the real hyperinflation isn't just in prices. It's in the lies we've been taught to believe. Thanks for watching.